Saudi Arabia 2023. Red Bull are as dominant as ever, and Jos Verstappen just cannot hide his glee, as this one seems to have been won by a guy wearing exactly the same suit as Max. Who the hell's this guy? Have they got a second car? Welcome to F1 More Thing. I'm your host, a man whose face is exactly the same as Jos Verstappen's when my dad picks me up just to leave me on the side of the road. Jos Verstappen's new book, by the way, is out now. It's called How to Generate Childhood Trauma. Welcome to F1 More Thing. I'm Joe Pilbrow. Hello, everyone, and welcome to F1 More Thing. The second race of the season in Saudi Arabia for 2023 is complete. Sergio Perez has won it in what has to be said is a pretty impressive drive from the Mexican driver. Put it on pole, led the majority of the race, and finished ahead of his teammate Max Verstappen, who had to power his way from 15th on the grid after a drive shaft problem. Max at the end going for the fastest lap, just to make sure that he doesn't give anything to Sergio Perez, like leading the World Championship just for one race. I think we're beginning to see a fractious relationship at Red Bull that is going to lead to a Hamilton-Rosberg style catastrophe. That's my claim at the beginning of the season. I think we can be sure that the relationship at Red Bull is going to break down this year, based on them being the only two drivers probably competing for a world championship. The radio messages at the end, I think, give a lot away as to that eventually leading to a hat throwing in the driver cool down room type experience, similar to Rosberg and Hamilton. That's going to be very interesting as we head towards the end of the year. Overall, though, a very interesting race. A lot of storylines to catch up on and to talk about going into the rest of the season. It's only the second race, but there is a lot of things to talk about. It was great to see Fernando Alonso on the front row of the grid again. Well, just to the left-hand side of the front row of the grid. It's my personal opinion that you'd be wrong to say that that would be a pure mistake on Fernando's part. I think Fernando knew exactly what he was doing there, lining up a little bit to the left, not in front. It can still be classed and seen as a mistake, but lining up a little bit to the left, just so he's a little bit closer to that inside line to take Checo into the first corner. Some people questioning whether that is an advantage. I think it's almost definitely a small advantage, heading down to a left-handed turn one, and you're a little bit over to the left already. Leads Checo to have a little bit, even if it's just a couple of centimeters, to move across to defend or to squeeze Fernando, and that's going to be a slight disadvantage. So I think Fernando, and I think this is sort of clarified by his response when he was told he was getting a penalty. He was just a bit like, okay, no worries, I'll just drive a bit faster. Similar to the way that Ricciardo, when he was told that he had a penalty, he just said, all right, I'll just drive faster then. I think Fernando probably, if he didn't do it on purpose, once he knew that he was in the wrong place in the grid box, he would have gone, fine, I'll just take the lead. I'll keep Perez in check for a lap or two. And then I can just hang on to his coattails with DRS. And then I've got a gap behind me. And then we're a comfortable third place by the end of the race. So I think, yet again, I think it would be remiss of anybody to say that Fernando hadn't thought about that beforehand. We are aware of many instances where Fernando is playing the game, is always in a similar way to Vettel did back in the day, finding little nuances in the regulations, finding little hacks, things that he knows that even if he gets a penalty for, he'll still be okay by the end of it, and it might even lead to an advantage over the course of a whole race. And that is one of the reasons why it's exciting to see Fernando back at the front of the grid, really, because those little things that are going to lead him to maintain a strong position in every race and overall in the championship is going to make for a very interesting season, even if Red Bull are far out in the distance. Overall, though, I think those regulations are probably going to be changed pretty soon, or at least cleared up. Two instances in the first two races of drivers being either slightly outside of their position or slightly to the left or to the right or forwards. I think it's in a sport that's so technologically advanced and a sport that has a helicopter or a drone above all of the drivers at the start. It's mad to me that we're still going off of painted lines. It would be very easy for sensors on the grid to note to the left or to the right or in front, and just to be able to say, you're not in the right box, redo the formation lap. And then once they've told all of the drivers whose fault it was, that driver can then feel sort of like the kid at school who manages to get the whole class stuck back after school, just from their misbehavior. And then people would do it a lot less. So I think that regulation will probably be changed pretty soon, or at least cleared up. It seems strange that they've started cracking down on it now when there was clearly other cars on the grid that had done it in that race and they weren't penalised. And also many instances in the past where drivers have done exactly the same thing and not been penalised. So it'll be interesting to see what they do to try and clear that up. There's going to be a lot of discussion, I think, around that this season in terms of them clearing up regulations that are just not clear enough, similar to the one that Fernando later got penalised for not serving his penalty correctly, which is the jack at the rear of the car, touching the car before they'd served the 5-second penalty. Um, Firstly, I don't think that's a major advantage. Secondly, I don't think it counts really as working on the car. But again, the phrase working on the car is subjective. They just need to either make it don't touch the car, or you can touch it just to get in position to be ready to work on it. But it doesn't make sense to me to penalize that, especially when they can find 7 examples predictably in recent history where other teams have done it and not been penalized. So they just need to be a bit clearer on stuff like that. They just need to penalize people across the board if they're going to do it, just so that other teams know. But also, I don't think that leads to that much of an advantage to penalize people for it, especially when loads of other people are doing it. But regardless, I think that'll probably be cleared up pretty soon. And I mean, I thought for a second that Aston were about to do a Renault in Singapore from back in the day. Lance ordered to stop on track with seemingly no problem whatsoever. It's been confirmed that they did have a problem, but at the time it seemed there wasn't a particular noise or a problem that they had. And it was definitely going to be helping out Fernando supposedly by having a safety car and bringing him back into contention with Perez, and closing that gap using the safety car distance. But I think Alonso had gone past the pits, so it kind of blew that theory out the water. But it'd be a great way for Aston Martin to get immediately disqualified from a championship they're going to do pretty well in, if they were about to do a alternative strategy for Fernando Alonso, just like Renault did in Singapore that time. And I think it was just in my head just because it was the weekend where people were talking about Max starting 15th, and the last time somebody won, which Max was probably predicted to do, was Fernando Alonso in Singapore. And it doesn't really count as a win if you have to cheat the entire system and get your teammate to crash into a wall in order to win it. Now, does it? But overall, a strong weekend for Aston, other than the reliability from Lance. It was a really strong move from Lance around the outside of the Ferrari. And yeah, just unlucky with the reliability, really. I think reliability is going to come down to ruin a lot of people's championships this year. It's also going to make Red Bulls a lot more different. But Fernando Alonso, after just 2 rounds, is 4 points ahead of the entirety of Ferrari. Slowly becoming an Aston Martin fan rather than a Ferrari fan. Unfortunately, I think this entire episode is going to be talking about Red Bull because I think this is foreboding of the entire season at large. A lot of evident distrust in the team, I think. Only in the second race, Perez questioning which lap times both drivers are being told to do. Max also saying, well, it doesn't matter if you don't care about the fastest lap. I care about it. I'm going for it. After the controversy and the comments of sort of Monaco and Brazil last year, that's going to boil over this year, I think. Now that it seems it's only those two going for a championship, Red Bull say things like they're clear to fight, but I think they say that expecting Max to dominate the season and therefore it not really have to be a problem that Checo is challenging him. But if Checo can get a hold of this car and can challenge in the places where Max isn't as strong, which doesn't seem to be many places, it's going to be a real problem to manage that because Max isn't going to take second place, let alone in the championship. But also, he wasn't very happy about coming second in this race, even though it didn't seem like he could challenge even when he was on the pace. He was closing the gap for a while, but didn't seem to be able to close it enough. And Perez seemed to have the measure on just being able to open that gap back up again when he was told the times that he should be doing. But it just seems mad to me, the reaction that Verstappen and his dad have had after the race. It's the second race of the season. I get that the attitude of being that competitive and being the most competitive driver on the grid, not allowing your teammate even the fastest lap to lead the championship for a race, that's what makes the great champions. And all the, the Schumachers and the Hamiltons and the Sennas have all had that. But it's the second race. It's pretty much confirmed that a Red Bull will win the championship unless they have some major reliability problems throughout the rest of the season. And I think over the course of a season, Max should be confident that he can have the measure of Perez. It seems quite revealing that there isn't a complete happy camp at Red Bull, but also it seemed quite revealing that Max isn't particularly. It seemed evident that Max isn't that confident that he can have the measure of Perez. Perez has won this race, but that was a Perez who only got it on pole probably because Verstappen had a problem. Now, Perez is going to have to be able to challenge Max even on the weekends where he doesn't have problems in order to fight for a championship. And there isn't necessarily proof of that yet. All of the races that he won last year were races that Max had a problem at or wasn't able to set a lap in qualifying in Monaco, for example. So I think might be wrong, but it seems there's a couple of weekends where Perez has won, sure, but they haven't been just Perez has beaten Verstappen in qualifying and then gone and won the race on race pace either. So it seems quite misleading at this point, I think, to think that Perez is going to challenge Max for the championship. But then Max's response to coming second or being told things by his team that he didn't necessarily trust sort of suggests there's less confidence in that particular notion than I would have thought Max thought he had in himself. And I mean, the fact that Sergio was as suspicious as he was on the radio and in the cool down room afterwards, I think shows that he is coming to the end of the contract where there's not going to be that many opportunities for him to be in a championship winning car. And therefore, he's not going to take too much shit from Red Bull this year in terms of them prioritizing Max or accidentally putting him on the correct strategy and Perez not. And I think he's setting his flag in the ground early of, if you tell me a time, I'm going to be questioning your time. So you better be telling us the same stuff. And I think overall it got sort of misrepresented on the TV a bit because it made it look like the engineers were telling them different stuff. But overall, they were being told to do the same times, just in a different way. And the engineers did quite a good job overall of managing the sort of suspicious behavior of each of the drivers. There's a very good thread, if you want to go and have a look at it, by Dr. Obbs on Twitter of analyzing the radio messages sort of lap by lap and the times that the drivers actually did. And it goes into quite good detail about, how the engineers were telling them the same thing. Max had a few laps of radio silence that were interesting of him doing different laps to what they were telling him. But there wasn't much that Lambiase could do about that. But overall, I think it got made less trustworthy on television. Fair enough, entertainment. But I don't think it could be misrepresented how little trust both the drivers had in their team telling them what to do. And Max especially hates it when he has reliability problems and when he can't win a race because he thinks there's reliability. And him being really worried and self-conscious about the drive shaft problem and the car making a weird noise throughout the whole of the race. Is that beneficial to the team to be constantly berating them for any reliability problem, even though they are rarer than lots of other teams, and also an incredibly quick car where even with reliability problems, they can still probably win it? I don't know. But then again, that kind of attitude leads the team to go, well, we cannot let that happen again because he'll be really pissed at us and make us look bad. So we'll make sure we're on it. So it's sort of good and bad to have that sort of attitude. And Max isn't going to be happy coming second for reliability or for being beaten by his teammate or for the team deciding that he shouldn't go for fastest lap. And he's just going to do the opposite. And Perez knows that. So he's just going to have to fight fire with fire, I think, on the Perez side of the garage. But I mean, Perez coming to the end of his contract very soon, I think he knows that Red Bull and Max sort of hold the cards in terms of what he's able to do in terms of challenging and also being a prick when he needs to be. Red Bull underestimate how much they need someone like Checo who can win the races when Max isn't there. But I don't think they're going to have a smooth sailing. Perez can't challenge Verstappen this year, so we don't have to worry about them fighting each other as much this year. Max could come out at the start of Melbourne and just dominate the race, but it's yet to be seen that he has the complete measure on Perez. And it's not as if Perez is going to exit himself from the team. You know, he's not going to do a Rosberg and just try and win the championship and retire. Perez is going to stick around for as long as they'll have him, I get the impression. And that's going to create a problem in itself because it's not as if Red Bull, when they've got a really long contract with Verstappen, can just decide, oh, well, we'll just put someone else in that car who's, you know, going to be able to pick up the pieces if Max isn't there. But he's not going to really challenge Max over the course of a championship. And I think that's what they put Checo in there for, really. But if that changes this season, then they've got a problem on their hands. And I don't know who the hell they put in there once Checo's contract's over or once they decide that Perez is too close to Verstappen. You'd like to think that they want both their drivers to have a chance at winning a championship, but the way Red Bull act and how happy or unhappy they are based on whether Max has won, I think is a telltale sign that they just want to have a smooth sailing Schumacher Barrichello relationship at that team. I don't think they're going to get that this year. I mean, let's say that Perez can genuinely challenge Max this year. Verstappen will put his foot down. He'll play some psychology. He'll have Perez out of that team before he wins it fairly, just by playing psychological games or by saying, well, look, if you don't prioritize me, then maybe I'll go elsewhere. And Red Bull will immediately throw the hands up in the air and go, we're so sorry, Max. Please don't hate us. Come back to the team. But to be honest, I think overall, I don't think this race is representative of an entire season. I think Max overall will have the measure on Perez. The ability to drag time out of it in qualifying and then to have unbelievably consistent race pace. That's where Verstappen will win it. And I think Perez overall will still only win races where Max isn't there to challenge him. But we'll see. But something that does annoy me is the fact that Max will say before the race, you know, I'm coming from 15th. We don't know how easy or hard it will be to challenge the cars and to overtake them. So, you know, just a podium, I'd be happy with that. And then he finishes second, only a few seconds behind his teammate. And he's upset that the team didn't help him win it. And I get, again, that that is something that a champion has inbuilt within them. They don't come second and be happy about it. But don't say things like that at the start of the race then. Say, I want to win the race, and that's what I'll be going for. It seems quite in Max Verstappen's nature to be matter of fact about stuff, and yet he isn't before a race in comparison to afterwards. So, yeah, managing expectations seems to be something that he does outwardly, but not inwardly. And maybe some other drivers are better at doing that than him. But Mystic Meg on the grid, Fernando Alonso, saying that he'd be in second by lap 25 and then letting him past on lap 25 is just top Fernando Alonso predictions. One of the reasons that the Aston Martin hasn't won the race yet is just because Alonso's carrying the weight of a large crystal ball in his car. That the engineers at Aston have told him to get rid of it just for weight saving. We've put so much effort into these suits and the steering wheel and the parts of the car being as light as possible, and you're carrying around this glass fucking ball, Fernando. Get it out of the car. Elsewhere at Mercedes, it was another weekend where they performed a lot better than people thought they were going to. Not really in anybody's race for a large amount of the time, but still able to qualify third with George Russell, still able to be in contention for the podium if Fernando Alonso's penalty had stuck. So, yeah, again, it seems that they're able to do a lot better than they think they are before a race. But Hamilton's comment saying that he's still not connected with the car, not able to get the pace out of it, and that George Russell had done really well, it does sort of remind me and confirm what myself and a lot of people thought about Russell coming into that team and having that experience at Williams with, driving a car that is just not predictable or not helpful to him in terms of driving style, but still being able to perform it and outperform it. That experience is invaluable in terms of what we thought he would be going to do at Mercedes, which is going to drive a car that is easy to drive. Before he joined, we didn't know Mercedes were going to build a shitbox. We thought that they'd have a nice, easy, championship winning, dominating car again. And so I remember saying at the time that George Russell's experience of driving a car where he's not predictable or he's not able to predict what the car is going to do is only going to be helpful to him when driving a car that is predictable. But unfortunately, it's gone the other way, where his experience of driving a car that's unpredictable has helped him drive another car that's unpredictable. And, I wasn't too confident in saying at the time, maybe Russell will outperform Hamilton just because of that experience. But then last season, he did on many occasions outperform him. And this season, he's had the measure of him as well, both in qualifying and in the race. And I still don't particularly like saying it, but it might be the case that Hamilton's had too many cars that have been easy to drive, or at least predictable, that getting his head around a car that doesn't do the same or have the same traits or doesn't feel connected to is even more difficult to get used to than George Russell finds it easy to get used to. But then it's Lewis Hamilton. So I don't like saying that because you'd have thought that any car he gets into, he'd be pulling the best out of. But when you've got a comparison of a young teammate like George Russell and you know that you haven't pulled the best out of the car, questions have to be asked. And I mean, George seemingly had the measure of him in terms of managing his pace, thinking that Fernando had the penalty, so managing his tyres. And when he found out that he didn't, at a time where he thought, or we thought, Lewis Hamilton has the better strategy and the better tyres, so let him through, George just put his foot down and went, no, all right, I'll just bugger off into the distance then for a few laps. And then we don't have the problem of Lewis being anywhere near me to let him past. So having that extra pace is even more impressive from George's point of view, and showing a trait that is often only afforded or spoken about in terms of the really experienced or the champions on the grid, in terms of being able to strategize while he's driving. He's doing that thing of managing other people's races like Fernando Alonso was doing in Bahrain, of knowing when to push people, knowing what tires to manage. And, all the drivers have an element of that. That's why they're there. But not all the drivers do we hear them doing that on the grid. They just sort of do what the team tells them to do. And George isn't the driver that we hear just doing what the team tells him to do. He says, look, we'll do this. We'll manage the tires for a bit. Ironically, his strategy was rubbish because Fernando had already taken his penalty. But at the same time, I think that's a good trait, because as soon as you give someone like that a car that is predictable and is championship worthy, they've got so much more extra capacity for managing his race and managing other people's race, that when the car is on the pace, that extra capacity just leads you to further your distance to the rest of the grid. And the top four, finally, we come to Ferrari, who not much to say about them, really, is there? Because they just haven't been on the pace. They didn't qualify that well, didn't have very good race pace, especially on the hard tyres at the end of the race, and just really in no man's land. Not really at the front, not really in the midfield. And it's amazing how quickly we forget how ridiculous it is that Aston Martin is now the second fastest car. Just try and put yourself back into the mindset of even just before testing, or even madly at the end of last season. If you'd have said that to yourself, it would have been crazy. But we have such short memories that it's completely normal that Fernando Alonso has 2 podiums now. And Ferrari are nowhere, and Mercedes are not a championship winning team. It's completely normal, weirdly. But Ferrari really, in a year that should have been their year in terms of remaining fighting for a championship, we thought, well, they've got the car, they've got the drivers, they just need to brush up a little bit operationally, and they'll be up there fighting for another championship. And even though they've got a new team principal, even though they have brushed up operationally, I think, based on a very small sample size of the first 2 races, they haven't been too bad this year. They had a double stack at the last race that was successful, that worked for them. They didn't fuck it up. And the only thing that we maybe have seen that would be operationally slightly bad is Charles not being told to hurry it up to get in front of Hamilton at the safety car. But overall, it hasn't been a complete catastrophe. Oh, no, hang on. Charles didn't finish the first race because of, oh, yeah, and Charles has taken a penalty because of the electronics. And, oh, hang on, how's that going to play into the rest of the season? Maybe I've spoken too soon on the operational side of things. Yeah, I'm going to retract everything I've said. But in a year where they should be fighting and the operationally hasn't been too bad as terms of strategy and race operations, let's say, it's a shame that they just don't have the car now to fight up the front. And all of the teams are now saying, when Max comes up behind us, when he starts 15th on the grid, he's not really our race, so we'll not make it too difficult for him. Is depressing, really, isn't it? Because a team like Ferrari, a team like Mercedes, and a team like Aston Martin saying, we'll just let him through. That's not really an exciting race. So it's helpful that a race is made exciting by more than just the team at the front, because if it wasn't, it would be incredibly boring. So another couple of points of order, I suppose, from Saudi Arabia is McLaren having another terrible race, finishing at the back. They are the last team in the constructors. They are fighting a rookie in a Williams for 17th place. I mean, I'm hesitant to say that it is a real problem, because, you know, the problem that they had in the first race was just, I think, an amalgamation of bad luck from a couple of technical problems that they hadn't seen before. You can put that down to unlucky. And then this race, you can put it down to unlucky that Oscar Piastri got a bit of wing damage that then flew off backwards into Lando Norris's wing and damaged his wing. I mean, how unlucky do you have to be? But at the same time, Piastri was so cautious in that first corner, and then just not slightly cautious enough to not get that damage. And Lando was clearly being very cautious as well and couldn't avoid the wing. And it's just so upsetting to see how much they're failing at the moment. I'm hoping that their upgrades are way better than they claim they're going to be when they roll up in Imola. So only a couple races before all of the teams start adding in all of their upgrades and interesting little things that they're going to be doing to help improve their car. And hopefully over the course of the season, the imbalance in wind tunnel time and all that sort of stuff is going to play a big part as well. But reliability is probably the only thing that's going to get in the way of Red Bull. And, you know, I think it would be pretty exciting to see a falling out. You don't want to see people falling out, but it does make it more entertaining. And if that's another obstacle in the way of Red Bull dominating completely a whole year, then maybe that's more exciting for the competitive nature of the sport from a neutral's point of view. Alfa Romeo surprised me, actually. They did a really good race in Bahrain, and they were just absolutely nowhere throughout the entirety of practice, qualifying, and the race. I don't have a clue what's happened to them, and I have nothing more to say on it other than it was disappointing to see them at the back of the grid for so long. I thought Alpine looked consistent in practice, but then they were sort of not too well known in the race. It's amazing how much people can fall off the radar as they go into a full race distance, but they're certainly going to want more than that. But now that all these teams have been pushed down behind Aston Martin and Mercedes and Ferrari and Red Bull, you just don't really see any of the teams anymore, do you? Other than McLaren and Williams fighting at the back. Another person who's not really lived up to expectation is Nick de Vries. Not been able to compete with Tsunoda really this season so far, and there was a move. I think it was in the early few laps where he's gone really tight to the inside of the bank corner and lost it. There's a car going around the outside who's got all the grip. He's sort of put in a move I didn't think was really on when I saw the onboard to start with, and not been able to pull it off. Just seemed a bit rookie-ish, to be honest. And I didn't think De Vries would be doing mistakes like that at this point because he's such an experienced guy in other formulas and has a race in Formula One under his belt where he did really well. I don't know if it's just sort of elements of that car that just don't suit him, but yeah, he hasn't shown his true colours, I don't think, quite yet in the season. And I'm excited to see that it sort of mix up on a lot of different tracks because we still, although we think we've got a good picture of the entire season going forward, we still haven't really seen a full collection of tracks, circuits, and reliability problems thrown into the mix. So it's only going to change as we go throughout the season. But overall, a very interesting race in Saudi Arabia. I think it's going to start a lot of the storylines that are going to become very interesting as we go throughout the season. It's a race that confirmed that Max is about to enter his crying if I don't win every race phase of his career. Sergio Perez is not going to be taking any of his shit this year without questioning it. And Fernando Alonso will have the best seats in the house for the Red Bull drivers to eventually implode, crash into each other, and win every race. Let's have it in Spain, shall we? Turn 3. That is it for F1MoreThing for this week. Thank you very much for watching and for listening. And as ever, please like and share the video. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and share it with, just send it to one of your mates who likes F1. Be really appreciated. It'd be good to try and grow and see how many people we can get listening. And if you've enjoyed the episode, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or on the YouTube channel. And you can send me any questions or thoughts to f1morething@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you. I will see you in a couple of weeks' time for another full episode. And in the meantime, you can check out all the clips of the show on TikTok and on Instagram. Just search for F1MoreThing. And thank you again for listening. I will see you in a couple of weeks' time for Melbourne. I will leave you on the most succinct radio message of all time from Yuki Tsunoda. See you next race in Melbourne.